Welcome to this edition of the Head to Head Podcast. I'm your host, Cam McKinney. This is episode number 44 of the Head to Head Podcast. And in this edition of the podcast, I'm going to be talking all things about the Oklahoma City Thunder who lost in the first round of the NBA playoffs to the Portland Trail Blazers in 5 games. It has been an interesting 3-year cycle for the Oklahoma City Thunder. They have had very highs in the NBA regular season, and they have had very much lows in the NBA playoffs. 3 straight years of losing in the first round since Russell Westbrook signed that mega contract. They got him alongside guys who have become stars like Victor Oladipo and proven stars already, Paul George, but each time they have lost in the first round each of the last 3 seasons. So to me, what's wrong with the Oklahoma City Thunder? It seems like it should work. You have 2 of arguably top 20 NBA talents on the roster, but I think the roster construction is really at the head of the issue for the Oklahoma City Thunder. To me, it's a 2-man show. Your third leading scorer cannot be Dennis Schroeder. For those of you not familiar with the career of Dennis Schroeder was the point guard who replaced Jeff Teague, who won 60 games with the Atlanta Hawks. And Dennis Schroeder never quite lived up to the hype, got a huge $70 million contract with the Hawks, and now he is basically the 6th man for the Oklahoma City Thunder. But last year at about 14 points a game, he was their 3rd leading scorer. He is not efficient enough to be your 3rd leading scorer in today's NBA. And I also love Steven Adams, but he is not a good enough scorer. He does that lazy one-handed floater, and that's like his biggest offensive move. There needs to be more offense around the Oklahoma City Thunder. And I think one of the biggest issues for the Thunder, probably the last decade, even when they had Durant, was weak head coaches that didn't have an offensive system. Do you know why Steve Kerr and the Warriors are the best team in basketball for the past decade? It's not all about the players. Mark Jackson had the players. It's about the system that Steve Kerr assembled. It's about ball movement. With Russell Westbrook and even with Kevin Durant and Paul George, it's like a my turn, your turn type of thing. It's Russell Westbrook's turn to score. Now it's Kevin Durant's turn to score. Now, like 5 years later, it's Russell Westbrook's turn to score. It's Paul George's turn to score. There needs to be a flow to the offense. It can't be my turn, your turn nonsense. That is not basketball. There needs to be teamwork involved. I mean, Paul George stayed with the Thunder because how much he loved playing with Russell Westbrook, yet when they're on the court together, it seems like they have zero chemistry whatsoever. Now, Russell Westbrook is going to have huge assist numbers because he has a massive usage rating. Yes, I know he can get the ball to Paul George. I know they have some sort of chemistry, but does it really look that great at basketball? Does it really look aesthetically pleasing to watch the Oklahoma City Thunder play basketball? And another huge issue I have is their lack of shooters. Look at what Houston has surrounded James Harden with. If we're going to compare Harden to his former teammate Westbrook, they've surrounded him with shooters in the likes of Eric Gordon and others. Who does Russell Westbrook have that's a formidable 3-point shooter? Terrence Ferguson and Raymond Felton. That's right, Raymond Felton. I grew up watching Raymond Felton on the Knicks and the Bobcats back when they were the Bobcats. That's right, Raymond Felton used to be a pretty good starting point guard, even when he was with the Portland Trail Blazers. But guess what? That was 15 years ago. Raymond Felton is no longer an adequate point guard position, and he cannot be one of your rotation players. I love Sam Presti as a president of basketball operations for the Thunder, but his bench is so disappointing. There is no one there. I like Jeremy Grant. He's a really good defender, but again, they were relying on Jeremy Grant to become a 3-point shooter. 3-point shooting is inexpensive in the league right now. It makes zero sense to me why you have a lack of it. Terrence Ferguson cannot be your main three-point shooting. The difference between Westbrook and Harden is Harden can get open shots because there are other three-point shooters around. I think if Harden were the only three-point shooter on the Rockets, he'd have a poor shooting year, the same of the likes of Russell Westbrook. They are not the most consistent of three-point shooters. They are not efficient scorers. I would categorize both of them as inefficient scorers. Yes, they are great scorers, but they are not the most efficient players. And I think for Westbrook to really be involved in the offense and to be a better shooter, he needs to be surrounded by better scorers and a better head coach. I didn't like Scott Brooks back then, and I don't care for Billy Donovan much right now. Listen, I'm not one to say that Billy Donovan should lose his job, but I think if they do bring him back, they need to get to at least the Western Conference Finals next year for me to even consider keeping him. Listen, Sam Presti did a miraculous job by getting Paul George, but now it kind of looks like maybe he could have done more with Victor Oladipo. I mean, who would you rather want right now moving forward? Oladipo or Paul George? Although I would argue Oladipo would never have been able to develop the same way because he needs the ball and Westbrook has the ball. I mean, that's the Russell Westbrook problem. Victor Oladipo was never going to realize his full potential as a teammate of Russell Westbrook's, and that's the problem. Listen, I love Russell Westbrook. I actually enjoy the triple-double sometimes. But I do believe he's not the greatest teammate. I am going to compare him to Aaron Rodgers. They are both at the top of their sports. Russell Westbrook, a top 5 point guard. Aaron Rodgers, a top 5 quarterback. But sometimes it seems like it's their way or the highway, and it doesn't seem like that creates a winning type of culture. Now, Aaron Rodgers has a Super Bowl, so he gets kind of a pass in this category. Russell Westbrook has been to an NBA Finals, but he wasn't the best player on that. Can you win a title with these two people being, I'm not going to say they're all about them, but they have a certain style that is going to keep doing it. Aaron Rodgers is going to continue to throw Hail Mary passes, and Russell Westbrook is going to continue to play basketball in his style. This kind of sometimes out of control. I also think that's another huge difference between Westbrook and James Harden. To me, Russell Westbrook just sometimes plays completely out of control. James Harden, say what you will, even when he's having off nights, he is completely in control of what's happening on the basketball court. And I think Russell Westbrook, it just looks like sometimes he's a maniac out there. Like you could tell that Damian Lillard was really getting under his skin in this series. To be beaten in 5 games by another top 5 point guard is probably a miserable ending to his season. Now, the Oklahoma City Thunder at one point were as high as the 3 seed in the NBA playoffs, and then they were as low as the 8 seed, and then when they got back up to the 6 seed, I thought they were going to be able to even beat the Portland Trailblazers, the 3 seed, who, by the way, the year before got swept by the Pelicans and Anthony Davis. But that did not happen this year as the Trailblazers beat the Oklahoma City Thunder in 5 games. And again, I think the Thunder have to reevaluate where things are going between Paul George and Russell Westbrook, because it seems to me there was at times this year questions of who the best player on the team is, and you cannot have that. Is it Paul George's team? Is it Russell Westbrook's team? Russell Westbrook clearly had his worst shooting year ever, shooting below 35% from free, and the amount of shots he takes. He had 21 more shots than Paul George in the playoffs this year. That is not okay. But this is the same Russell Westbrook who used to do this to Kevin Durant, and Paul George is no Kevin Durant. So clearly, Russell Westbrook is going to continue to think of himself as the alpha dog. Russell Westbrook clearly is a guy who wants to play hero ball, and sometimes that works, but when it doesn't, it looks awfully bad on the basketball court. And there's no moving on from these players. Westbrook is locked up to a max. He is going to continue to play his style of basketball. You have to surround him with better talent. He needs to be surrounded by better bench players other than Nerlens Noel. I mean, come on, your backup bigs need to be better. I mean, they did get rid of Victor Oladipo and Sabonis' son. I mean, they could use a big like Sabonis right about now on the Oklahoma City Thunder. I'm not saying they should regret getting Paul George, but they should have had a better backup plan to have better backup bigs. I thought their big rotation at one point was great. At one point, they had Steven Adams, Enes Kanter, and Sabonis. Now, really, the only decent big they have is Adams, and they have Nerlens Noel, but he really doesn't do anything for me. He is a bust when it comes to NBA players. Nerlens Noel, I expected him to have a way better basketball career. He has the talent, but it doesn't seem to me that he has the ambition. He had 3 unique bigs who could score, rebound, and pass the ball. Adams, Sabonis, and Kanter. Enes Kanter was also on the Portland Trailblazers team that beat you in 5. I'm not saying you should regret getting Paul George, but again, you should have had better bench players around him. Your bench was basically all year Terrence Ferguson, Dennis Schroeder, Nerlens Noel, and Raymond Felton at one point. There needs to be, Jeremy Grant is in and out of the rotation. Again, you need to have shooters around Westbrook and George, because that is how you win in the NBA now. Because you need to pick, the NBA teams we're going to guard Westbrook and we're going to guard George, and we basically will let Schroeder do whatever he wants to do because he's really not a threat. Dennis Schroeder is a hot streak player. I mean, when he gets hot, it's great. When he's not hot, it's awful. They need consistent shooters. They need guys like Kyle Korver on the Oklahoma City Thunder, a guy who doesn't need the same amount of shots as Westbrook or George, but who's going to nail the big threes when they need him. Terrence Ferguson had a decent season from free, but next year I want to see him to be one of the 3-point shooters on the team, not the only one. There needs to be change within the Oklahoma City Thunder. I'm not saying there needs to be a culture change. Listen, do I love the triple-double hunt that Russell Westbrook seems to be on every single NBA game? No. To me, it's kind of annoying. But listen, that's his style. They have a winning record when he gets those triple-doubles. So maybe in his mind, he thinks he needs to get those triple-doubles. I mean, what is it? 3 straight years averaging a triple-double. He's won an MVP. He is a top 10 NBA talent. That cannot be argued. I love his mentality. It reminds me of Kobe Bryant. It reminds me of a guy who doesn't want to be friends with his teammates. I enjoyed the back and forth between him and Lillard all series long. But the Oklahoma City Thunder did annoy me at the end when Paul George called that a bad shot when Logo Lillard hit the dagger free that took the Thunder out of the playoffs. Come on, dude. You don't get to diss the opponent who beats you in the playoffs, Paul George. Paul George had a great season. He was an MVP candidate at some point. Then he did have shoulder issues, and his 3-point shooting did take a hit. But I'll tell you this about that. You should have more 3-point shooters around them so you don't have to rely on Paul George as much. So you don't have to rely on Russell Westbrook as much. The NBA cannot be 2 guys do all the scoring and no one else contributes. And to me, that's down the stretch what happened to the Oklahoma City Thunder. They did try to solve it by getting Markieff Morris, but he himself had injuries in the season with the Washington Wizards and wasn't able to really be the Markieff Morris who was on the Wizards at all. I like the direction listen, I'm not saying that the Thunder are in a bad space. I am saying they need to figure things out or they're going to have to change head coaches. Because to me, Billy Donovan doesn't do anything special play-wise. Again, he's just letting it be his turn, my turn type of basketball when Steve Kerr, Doc Rivers are out-coaching him in huge and massive ways because they have teams. Billy Donovan has a great 2 players, but the rest of his team is at some point inadequate. Listen, Dennis Schroeder did a fine job off the bench, but Dennis Schroeder cannot be your 3rd leading scorer on a team that's going to win an NBA championship or even make it to a conference finals. And when you have Russell Westbrook and you have Paul George and you have 2 of the top 20 players in the NBA, I need you to be a threat at least to get to the Western Conference Finals. And I don't think at this point, at the end of the year, anyone thought of them as having a chance to get to the Western Conference Finals. I at least thought they'd get by Portland, who lost Nurkic, their big. I thought there was a chance they could make at least the second round of the Western Conference playoffs, but that is not the case, and they need to reevaluate. Listen, Westbrook had some good comments saying that he's going to reevaluate his game over the summer, but we've heard that before. This is the third straight year. Things need to change. The roster needs changing. No more Raymond Felton and Nerlens Noel on your roster. They are not efficient, good basketball players at this point. Sorry, Raymond Felton. I grew up enjoying your game, but again, I cannot have you being a key piece on a playoff team. Think about what he's going up against in other teams' backup point guards. Sean Livingston in the Western Conference comes to mind. Portland has a better bench than the Oklahoma City Thunder at this point. Your bench needs to be guys who shoot the basketball. And again, the Oklahoma City Thunder at one point had one of my favorite benches because they had adequate bigs on the bench. Nerlens Noel cannot be your key big man off the bench, or you're not going to win a lot of basketball games. Again, at one point they had my favorite rotation of bigs, Steven Adams, Enes Kanter, and Sabonis. Sabonis has turned into a pretty good player with the Pacers. And again, Victor Oladipo has become kind of a star, so it's going to be interesting to see who ultimately wins this trade. The Oklahoma City Thunder need to get to at least the Western Conference Finals to win this trade, in my mind. You kept Paul George. It's great. Paul George didn't leave you for the Lakers. That's a huge win for an organization like this. But if the Westbrook George era is going to be successful, you need at least a trip to the NBA Finals to make it worth my while. I mean, 2 of the top 20 players in the league, and you can't build a bench that's adequate around them, and a starting 5. Get more guys that score. Jeremy Grant is inconsistent, but again, he has flashes of brilliance that I like, but you need a better starting 5, and you need to get a real power forward on the roster. I mean, at one point you were starting Markieff Morris, who is kind of washed up at this point, but he was hurt. I understand why you got him. You need a starting 5. You do. There's no difference between that. You need a starting 5 on your basketball team that's going to score the ball. What's lost in all this is the Oklahoma City Thunder were actually a really good defense all season long. Russell Westbrook is a pretty good defensive player. Paul George is a fantastic defensive player. Your perimeter defense is good. You have Steven Adams as a key big man who's great defensively and a great offensive rebounder. Your problem is on the offensive end, and you did not do enough in the season to change that. This has been 3 straight years in a row where it's like, we're going to go wherever Russell Westbrook takes us. Well, guess where Russell Westbrook has taken you? 3 straight trips home in the first round of the NBA playoffs. And this past year, it wasn't really that close. Yes, it came down to a Game 5 shot by Damian Lillard. But guess what? You probably weren't going to win Game 6. And if it did go 7, guess what? The game would have been in Portland. And you probably would have had 0% chance in my mind to beat Lillard at home in Portland, and that's a problem. The Oklahoma City Thunder, to me, next season need to be at least a top 3 seed and make the Western Conference Finals for Billy Donovan to keep his job. We can't be 4, 5, or 6 anymore with this talent. They need to go out and get a key bench. I know they're against the cap because they have these 2 guys signed to max contracts, and they've locked up Steven Adams. I get that. But there is ways, draft guys who can be better bench players than what you're putting out there. I'm sorry to keep on picking on Raymond Felton, but he cannot be a key contributor to your playoff roster. That cannot be the case. Maybe bring back Markieff Morris and he'll be more healthy and you'll have a bet. And Dennis Schroeder's fine. But next year, Dennis Schroeder should be your 5th option on offense, not your 3rd. To me, that is a gigantic issue that other teams don't have. You need bench players that contribute on offense. Portland's bench was destroying Oklahoma City Thunder's bench this entire series, and it's one of the key reasons why you lost in 5 games. I want to end with this. I'm not saying the Oklahoma City Thunder are in a bad spot. If Billy Donovan did lose his job, there are many, many head coaches that would want to coach Russell Westbrook and Paul George. But when you have two of the top 20 players in the league, you need to live up to those expectations. And again, I love Sam Presti. He's the guy who had Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Russell Westbrook all on the same team at one point. And yes, he traded away Harden. That was a huge mistake. That's his biggest mistake as a GM. But he rebounded and he got Paul George on the roster. This is his time to build a basketball team to compete. So at least next year, my expectations are at least a top 3 seed and a trip to the Western Conference Finals. Or things need to change. It'll be interesting even if Billy Donovan survives this offseason for the Thunder. Things need to change. That's all I have to say about that. Thanks again for listening to this edition of the Head to Head Podcast. Again, I'm Cam McKinney, and there will be a new episode of the Head to Head Podcast every Monday on Apple Podcasts and iTunes. And check out my other podcast about movies, actors, directors, and TV shows that I enjoy. It's called Pop Culture Spotlight, all part of the Chatter Podcast Network. Check it out on Apple Podcasts and iTunes. Thanks again.